Welcome back, everybody, to Classical Christian Thought. I'm your host, Erick Ybarra, and I have today with me a returning guest, Father Patrick from the UK. How are you, Father Patrick?
I'm well, thanks to God. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. For the audience that is watching, you'll notice I have a different scenery here. I am traveling for work, and so I had to bring a little webcam with me that I bring when I travel. So I'm in a hotel room. It's going to look a little worse than usual. I've got a nice little setup at home, but this is going to do for today. So forgive me. And okay, so today we're going to be doing a discussion on the debate I had with Ubi Petrus on Pints with Aquinas. And Father Patrick, as everybody knows, we had debated on Pints with Aquinas about 3 years ago, and so Father Patrick is deeply vested in the subject, and so we both thought it would be of good interest to talk about the debate. So what I'm going to do is basically give you the floor. Well, I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll talk about what it is that you took away. But why don't we start off with, did you watch it? Did you like it? What you thought about it?
Yeah, I watched through it. So that was good. It was a little while ago now, so please forgive me. I'm starting to get a little rusty. I should have probably watched it again.
No worries.
Yesterday, but no, it was fine. It was fine. I suppose I have a slight. I'll bring out what my opinions are a bit more later. So, I thought it could have been a bit more said from the Orthodox point of side. I think you gave a pretty reasonable response to the points there. As always, I don't quite take some of your responses to the same degree as you would. but yeah. So overall, I sort of think that the line that Ubi/Denny took probably wasn't the best approach, and we'll go into why I think that later.
Were you surprised at who it was? Because this was like a face reveal, right? Nobody knew who he was until he walked through the door. That was pretty funny.
I remember Denny's name from way back, or about 10 years ago, when we used to have chats and stuff like that. So, I suppose I'm not surprised it was him or not him. I sort of didn't know him well enough to sort of go, oh, but it was like, Denny, I know Denny.
Yeah. So, well, it was a surprise for me. I mean, I kind of had an idea that it was him. Like the first year, I kind of had an idea, but so many people said it wasn't, and I didn't see Denny anymore. I knew he wasn't always active on Facebook, and so it was a surprise for me. But okay, well, we chose the 5th and 6th centuries because originally I proposed, why don't we do a debate on the whole first millennium, right? But Ubi said that he had already done that with Dr. Locutus. He did that with Dr. Colarafi. And so he was a little tired of doing like the whole panorama of the first 10 centuries. So he wanted to pick like one thing, like, Chalcedon or said the Fifth Council. But I said, well, I don't know if I could do a deep dive into one thing. So I suggested maybe we can meet in the middle, where we can do like a span or a window of time. And that's when we came to the 5th and the 6th century. So that way we could cover the Council of Chalcedon, which is something that, of course, he really put a lot of research into. I could cover the history after Chalcedon, leading up to like the Formula of Hormisdas in the early 500s, and then culminating with 553 Constantinople II. And personally, I thought that this was a dangerous debate for me because, and I had expressed this when I chose the debate to some of my colleagues. One of what, Elijah Yassi, I said, look, I may be up against the wall in this debate because me speaking from the Catholic side, if I were on the Orthodox side, I've got a number of steaks to grill on on the papacy in the 5th and 6th century. So I took it on it as a challenge. I thought, we've seen so many Catholic debates where all they do is refer to the need for an authority, the need for a head, and how can you have a body without a head, and just over and over hearing the same mantra. And I thought, why don't we see a Catholic really sweat, under some real strong criticism. So that's really what I was expecting. But when you get into the debate, the clock, and there's just a number of things that happen. You know what I'm talking about. So that's how we came to that topic. If you were wondering, the 5th and 6th century.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting topic. It's a very interesting period, and I mean, there's a little bit of ammunition going both ways but the Fifth Ecumenical Council is very interesting to get a sense of some of the relations and interplay between the papacy, the emperor, the synods, what they were saying about each other, that whole thing that Regular's been in and out, deposed, not deposed, making his statements after the statements, confirming and stuff. Yeah, it's very fascinating. His points go both ways, I think, in this. So, yeah. But I think the debates seem to sort of not really get into that so much. It was more about the whole principle of appeal with vis-a-vis in synod or alone seemed to be the main point of argument in that, from what I've picked up. And I thought that's where Denny's probably didn't take the strongest Orthodox position into there. So, yes, anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, his emphasis, I think, was, if we can't find an instance of the Pope acting alone, then Vatican I is absent, and so he was, trying to drive that point home. And the second point that I think he really tried to make, which is typical of the material that he's published over the years, is that the Pope is actually the Archbishop of the whole universal synod. And, for the listeners here, when I say, I know Father Patrick knows what I'm talking about, but for the listeners, when we say the universal synod, we're not talking about a get together. We're talking about just the worldwide network of the bishops or the patriarchs and the archbishops. And I don't know if you recall, Father, but I knew that was something that was going to come up. So I had reached out to you like a month or so before the debate, and I asked you if there was anything in Orthodox theology that would, give to the universal primate the authority to call an ecumenical council a binding council, because the idea is, well, the bishop has jurisdiction over his flock. The archbishop has jurisdiction over bishops. In a sense, he's got privileges of sorts. One of those might be to convene a council, even though canonically there's a schedule already put into the law. So it's a question as to whether he has the authority to call a fresh council, or if he's just following the schedule that Nicaea put into gear. And then there's the patriarch, who may have authority to call a synaxis of the metropolitans. And so I reached out to a lot of canonical scholars around the whole world, and I wasn't getting a straight answer on this. So I didn't know what to expect from Denny on this, but it seems to be that he does take that position that just like the patriarch of a region, the Bishop of Rome was the Archbishop of the whole world. What do you take from that?
Yeah, that's where I think is the most dangerous position he took on this line. Now, he is not probably alone, as you said. There's different opinions now among Orthodox. And I think the present ecumenical patriarch is sort of moving in that direction. And this can be seen in the Council of Crete in 2016. He basically calls it on the ground that he has some sort of authority to call the bishops into council. And my particular position on this is exactly what Orthodox position is denying is correct for the Pope or any bishop to have this, even the whole idea of a universal synod of bishops with one bishop at the head of that Canon 34, which he quotes, doesn't apply to this level, and there is no such synod. So this is one of my strong positions, that synod never exists. And so therefore, and the Pope never had any authority to call such a synod. And that is why the emperors ended up filling that role. And it's very important that there is no one bishop who has that authority to call bishops into a council. And that's for the stability, for the stability of the church, which is a bit ironic. But so when he steps into that argument, I'm going, oh dear, well, you've basically lost the plot, because as soon as you've got that one bishop can call that, then it very quickly the logic goes, well, you need to have a certain stability of that. Then you assume that he has that see won't fall into heresy, because you've got to have a stability of the see. There's got to be a rock in a sense, and you very quickly get into Vatican I in the sense of his doctrinal infallibility. The only tweak he's making on it is more like a Gallican one that
right.
he really exercises in synod and not alone. But then you run into the problem that you bring up, is that the Archbishop of Rome does act alone in certain things. It's not always everything is synodal, and certainly never was there a case where he acted with a synod of a universal synod of the bishops. Matter of fact, the Pope was never at any of the first 7 ecumenical councils, and even though it didn't seem to be there was an actual reason that he was deliberately excluded. In matter of fact, in the end, he never was present. But that sort of shows that, well, if he's never present, only his legates are present, that he wasn't a necessary sense of the head or the convener and the moderator of the council in person, which would be the case if I had a metropolitan council. He would have to be sitting there to do his job, to moderate the actual council. So when he started going, I find that is problematic as soon as you admit that. So my personal way is these synods, Canon 34, are metropolitan synods. They are synods, little regional, provincial synods. And this is a heartbeat of the church, of the ordination of bishops, management of issues. These are the councils that hear the cases of you defrock a bishop, where you defrock a priest in a canonical disorder. This is the heartbeat of there. This is a court of first instant. This is a business part of the thing, and this is necessary throughout the life of a church, because you can't have new bishops without the consent of the metropolitan sort of. And you see Leo the Great, for example, he's spent a lot of time defending these against the exarchs, the ones who sit in the level above, and say, no, don't interfere with the rights of these synods. You must protect the rights of these synods. These are basically apostolic divine tradition. And so, yes, that's where that synodal thing. And if I may just go off into a little bit of
please.
Why this is. In the Orthodox sense, the reason is that each diocese with a bishop and presbyters is a full Catholic church. The Catholic Church is fully present there. And the bishop stands as Christ at the head of that church. Therefore, and he has sole, which where we had in our debate before, he has sole authority to consent to service, sole ordination rights, etc. in there, because there's one Christ, and therefore he's the one bishop who orders that. Now, when the synod meets, the principle is that the synod actually has no authority over the bishop per se, to force the bishop to do it, because you can't have an authority over Christ. The bishop stands at the head. So the synod has to actually work by unanimous consent. So all the bishops are actually agreeing. So their authority in any communal action is actually consented to for it to apply into their own church. This is why it has to be unanimous. It's not a majority rules thing. It has to have a unanimity of it, because each bishop has to consent, so the authority can apply within his own diocese. But the metropolitan stands as head to unify the bishops so that they work as one. And this is where most of your liturgical material goes on. This is where a lot of your little rituals and stuff like that, little orders of service, saints we remember. This is most of it. Then above that, you have the exarchs and or patriarchs, who are over many. These guys ordain the metropolitans, and they act as courts of appeal, so that if the people are not satisfied with the Metropolitan Council, they go to the exarch above as an appeal judge. Now, at this level, I don't think he needs to have work in synod. Now, he could call a synod of metropolitans. He could call, what is more likely, he calls his own metropolitan synod, because he's exarch is also a metropolitan. He's also a bishop. He has his own diocese. He's the head of his own metropolis. So he can call his own metropolitan if he wishes. But he can act alone. I see nothing in the canons that requires him to act alone. The synodal requirement is necessary for the metropolitan level because of what the bishop actually is vis-a-vis his diocese. That there cannot be a forcing, which is also why ecumenical councils actually have to be conferred by everybody, because there's no imposition above everybody, because Christ is the head of each place. There's no Christ of Christ, as Cyprian says. So even a synodal thing has to have a unanimous consent. So that each person who is the head is actually agreeing to what we are all holding and things. So there's no imposition over it, because there's no power can stand over these guys. Now, there's an authority of appeal. So if the bishop breaks the canons, he could be deposed by the finger. But that's going to get with the common canon law. The bishops come together and sort of that, or the appeal court. He can do it alone, or more commonly with advice of other bishops, because you, as it says in Scripture, do nothing without the advice, counsel sort of thing, to be wise. So you'll see most often councils, but it doesn't mean that a single decision can't be made. And then you've got the Petrine patriarchs, Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, with Constantinople as a sort of another Rome in there. And these are sort of more general final courts of appeal and points of unity for the church. And again, in the canon of, I think we've talked about this, 17:9 of Chalcedon, what happens is exarchs have a large, like Asia was an exarchate. Ephesus was the head of an exarchate. I think it was Asia. Then there's Pontus, Thracia. You get this mentioned in the canons. But in the West, you've got sort of the Greece area. Thessalonica was an exarchate of Achaia, sort of thing. You've got Gaul as an exarchate with lots of metropolises under him. You've got Africa, Carthage was an exarchate with lots of metropolitans under. Alexandria was just one exarchate and a patriarch at the same time. Same with Antioch, was one exarchate. Out of Antioch was carved a little bit for Jerusalem. Jerusalem was like a patriarch with a much smaller, he's not almost an honorary patriarch. He's not one of the Petrine sees per se. But he has a certain authority, but his metropolitan sees underneath. He's not allowed to interfere. You see the canons, that the status of a metropolitan is not overridden by the patriarch. And you see this in Canon 28, when the main point is that Patriarch Constantine can't go and ordain all the bishops around. No, the metropolitans must do that. He only ordains the metropolitans. This is constraining his rights, because he'll start to interfere with and during the bishop's ordination. And this is exactly the same stuff as Leo the Great's teaching. This is exactly along his line. So that part of the canon is completely in line with Leo the Great's teaching. Anyway, so what you get is that the exarchates are appeal courts. But the canon says that the Metropolitan Synod can appeal to Exarch or to Constantinople, and he can hear instead of the Exarch. Now, whether it applies only to Pontus, Ephesus, and Thracia, or Alexandria, I don't know, but it's an alternative one here. So this is interesting. So, in other words, each Exarch is a final court of appeal, and I do know that in the time of Justinian, you can't appeal from any patriarchal decision, whether it's Constantinople, whether it's Alexandria, whether it's Antioch, or whether it's Rome. So all these were final courts of appeal once they got to that level, but only as an appeal decision. So in other words, if Antioch, the priests have a problem with their bishop, there was actually scope to appeal to Constantinople or to Rome for help. And you see this. They have an internal thing. They'll go help Rome. So this is different. This is like a first instance call for help, as distinguished from the appeal court. So anyway, I'm just sort of setting up the structures of for me. It's important that there was no universal synod, and the reason I know that there's not is because there's a lot of issues in the first 3 centuries up until Constant, and no stage does the Pope, the Bishop in Rome, sort of go, all right, everybody come together. I'm ordering you to come into a council to sort out the date of Easter or the practice, which I disagree with. No, it couldn't happen until the emperor came. And then, the Imperial, and the reason the emperor can do it is he's ruler of the world, and he wants to know, what is the faith? Come and testify to me. What is the faith received by you all? And always, what is the Orthodox faith? I'm getting these Arians coming to my ear. What's going to be the faith of the empire? What faith am I going to use? And eventually, what is going to be the faith that is the foundation of the imperial constitution, for want of a better word? So they're interested to the testimony, and then he orders all the bishops to come and tell him. And then he orders all the bishops, because like St. Vincent's rule, what is for everywhere in all places at all times? This is a manifestation, right? Well, let's get the bishops all the world. And when they all agree, yep, we've received this, yep, then it means that this is not a local innovation. This must be apostolic tradition by their common consensus. And it also means any rules put out have agreed by all the churches to be implemented across the world. No imposition on any of them, respecting each one's jurisdiction and place and all the rest of it. Because each one has to represent Christ is there. You cannot impose as such. So that is sort of setting out an Orthodox model. And so where we get Vatican I, the problem is 2 problems I think we discussed in our debate. One is where he can go and ordain any presbyter he likes in any church by right, not by consent of the local bishop. So for our Orthodox, that is a no-no. That when it says immediate episcopal jurisdiction means the right of ordination. That is the main thing that the bishop does, apart from consecrating altars and there's 3 things really, and consent of service is what we discussed in our debate. But it's ordination rights. So when you say episcopal jurisdiction, you're claiming the right to ordain a bishop or presbyter everywhere. So this is where I would go, and therefore you have to prove that there's not a one-off or two-off thing, but a common practice that the Pope in the first millennium went around ordaining presbyters and deacons wherever he liked, because that is what the episcopal jurisdiction means. And so that's, to me, that's where the issue comes. Vatican I is a problem with that. And the second one is the concept of the sort of ability to call all bishops together into a council. I would say, no, where's that authority? But things like not being able to be judged, yeah, of course. Stability as a rock, yeah, I think there is actually a good need for that. The standing alone, in a sense, is one, yes, but taking St. Gregory, that's a 1 is actually in 3, which I find Vatican I's failing to teach what St. Gregory great teachers, and this is quite important little nuance on the thing. So anyway, that's
Yeah, it seems to me, it seems to me, 'cause, some of the things that I've read, I'm limited to the English language. So some of the things that I've read in the Orthodox literature, whether it was from John Meyendorff or Schmemann or some of the other volumes out there by like St. Vladimir, Seminary Press, Holy Cross, there seems to be that there is no external authority over the universal church because every locale is the fullness. And so whenever you get representatives of a locale into a synod, the synod can't then become something external itself because there's an influx of what's already internal to each locale. And so there's no like, where like a universal council that orders everyone to do this or that. It's more like the roots of every locale are coming together to prove the oneness of what they already are.
Yes, and affirm, and it's also founded on the affirmation of the received tradition, that we're continuing and preserving the apostolic tradition received and the faith received once for all. In other words, there's no sort of sense of adding or let's change this or do that. It's predicated on a sense of continuation. We come forward. What have we received? What is the tradition we have received? What are you doing? Innovating, adding something, or changing the way we do things? No, we've come together to talk about what we've all received. Well, the only modification in that is there are some variations in practice by the apostles, such as the dating of Easter. The apostles didn't always, for everything, give exactly the same thing. And so the council, and a couple of things, especially the date of Easter, desired to make it a uniform across all the churches. So in other words, a certain practice which was common to many of them became uniform. And the other one was kneeling on Sundays. They said there was different practices, but we want to make a uniform practice of standing on Sundays and through Pentecost. We want this to now be a uniform practice across all the churches. So not innovating, but just sometimes taking a predominant or practice that is done in the many places and therefore ordering that it becomes a uniform for the sake of the unity of the churches. But it's rare to do that, but occasionally that's the only time where they're not just taking what each place has necessarily received. They are taking what maybe a good number and then just unifying it across, because there is a point of the uniformity of church, where many times it doesn't matter. You have different rites, different things, but the few things that they did decide they want these uniform. So anyway, but generally it's because we're preserving the same faith and truth. So what do we need a council to come along telling us to do something different or change? If actually there's no council, we just keep doing what we're doing, and there's no need for a council. We just keep following. The council only comes necessary when there's a significant number of people stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then the council has to go and go, whoa, we're starting to get into chaos here because we're actually walking away from apostolic tradition. Let's come back.
So would you say that a much better tactic in an Orthodox Catholic debate over Vatican I would be, where is there evidence for a bishop of Rome to basically impose himself upon the institution of a local church and without invitation issue binding commands on the clergy, the laity of that diocese?
Yeah. That's, well, if you're going to go, it's immediate episcopal jurisdiction. So the most classic case would be, where does he come in with by right and ordain presbyters, deacons, subdeacons, readers? The ordination right. Where is he exercising that in a common thing? So it's not an exception. So not the one or two things you might put under he did that once. No. It has to be, the tradition is it's a common practice. He does this regularly because that's part of the tradition. Not that some pope at some stage in history did this irregularly and stuff. That doesn't prove our St. Vincent's rule. It has to be common practice. So you'd have to find quite a regular pattern of him going out. That is what establishes Episcopal jurisdiction. As he goes in now, you'll see this in the dictate paper, the Gregory VII. He claims this right that the Bishop of Rome can do this, but this is post-schism, and this is one of the things which is almost defining the position of Rome against the sort of, or as part of its reason to be in the state of the schism, the separation from the East. And so, so he's claiming that, and you'll see from that time a huge development in what happens in the West. There's a whole thing like monastic orders, etc. There's suddenly these orders, because monasteries have to be subordinated to their local bishop. And even up in Council of Lyon's, Second Council of Lyon's, he was still talking about this. Like these merchant orders, they transcend the local diocesan boundary. The monks, or the friars, I should say, or Dominican, they owe their obedience to an order which is outside the authority of the bishop. It's something above and beyond that. And that order is under the authority of the papacy. And it's this whole universal thing where the papacy suddenly gets this sort of universal direction where these orders can be under him that have authority to act and put their rules, etc., in the local diocese, which their practice is obedient to this order, not to the bishop. And so this is one of these orders wouldn't rise before. Benedictine monasteries, like Eastern monasteries, are underneath the authority of the bishop, because the bishop is the final and total authority of Christ in each place. So that you can start seeing this change historically. But the evidence you need to prove Vatican I is actually the Pope has gone around and actually ordained priests and deacons without the consent of the local, and everybody is happy with that. And I haven't seen that evidence.
Yeah. So let me just revisit one of the points you made. Not even like a rare instance would be sufficient, right? Like if we had, some people will look at the situation that happened in Constantinople with Anthimus, for example. And, for the listeners, that was a patriarch in Constantinople who he had hesitations with signing on to the Council of Chalcedon. And then Pope Agapetus from Rome visits Constantinople, and he ends up issuing a deposition, but it's in the context of a council. But even if it was an instance like a one-off where the Pope came and deposed a patriarch or ordained a deacon, without any kind of permission, even just one instance wouldn't be enough, right? It has to be something that is
sure, it's part of the common tradition that is common practice and received practice, which is true in every place, time, and time. It can't be a one-off, because that could be an innovation. It could be a mistake. So there has to be the regular pattern to be that tradition which we've received. And it has to be, in the case of an ordination of a deacon or presbyter with a standing bishop, so not sort of because there's no bishop there or something like that, with the standing bishop who's in a good with no impediment to his standing as a bishop. And then so it's not about the Pope can be argued has a position to excommunicate other bishops, and you could argue that he is a center of communion of the churches. So this comes with a certain authority, where he says, we won't accept this council. This is well, if Rome doesn't accept it, then how can we talk about it being true of all the churches? If Rome says that, it doesn't need any special authority. It just has to be because he's the first. It doesn't mean he's universal bishop or anything like that, or he's infallible. It just simply means that the first bishop, yeah, of course, you expected him to be accepting it for it to be properly a saint, but you also expect each see to see it, and they did. They wrote off every metropolitan has to come and accept the council sort of thing, or even if it's a little bit of threat and cut off. So those sorts of statements don't worry me. It has to be in the specific, it actually has to go in regularly ordaining presbyters and deacons and subdeacons, etc., and other dioceses which are not his own, because he only can ordain such in his own diocese in Rome.
Would there be, is there anything else that could qualify as evidence for Vatican I besides that? Or is there anything else that, could, in theory, anyway, is there anything else that could qualify as, oh, yeah, that doesn't really comport with Protestantism or Orthodoxy? That sounds more like Vatican I.
Well, I don't, as St. John Chrysostom says, really the only difference between a bishop and a presbyter is ordination. We can also add consecration of altars for temples, and the myrrh, forming the myrrh for a chrism. However, that's often done by patriarchs now, for one reason or another. But it's really ordination. The ordination is the main one. You get the canons, no one can ordain, and one bishop ordains in a church. So I can't, there's no other thing that immediately, I think we had our issue when we had our debate whether if the Pope is visiting and then a cleric asks for permission and the local bishop says no and the Pope says yes, who does he obey? And to me, the answer is he has to obey the local bishop. Otherwise, you deny him as bishop. There's only one bishop and one voice in there, one will, because Christ is one will. So, and if the Pope interferes, he has no right to do that, because that would deny the bishop as bishop fundamentally, because that is his reason to be as bishop. So otherwise, all the things about what happens with bishops, etc., sending other bishops to do ordaining in their own territories, ordering them to, like in the case of Jerusalem, go and sort out the churches over there. Well, there were local bishops which he's asking to do the job in their local territories, in places where there are no bishops, sort of thing. Okay, whether that's an abuse or overreach, or it could be, but it could be justified, because that is a sense of him exercising his oversight of all the churches, in the sense by trying to get them reestablished again. Okay, I accept that he can have that authority, and we might quibble about whether he's overreaching or not, but that's still within the realm of, okay, this is what we can expand to the particular privileges that we can give to the Bishop of Rome in doing these things, or deposing people and saying we excommunicate, we don't hold this faith, it's not common with us. Yeah, sure, why not? But that's different from the immediate Episcopal jurisdiction, which is what Vatican I claims, which is historically by Chrysostom, unless they are saying that there's something else in the tradition of the church which Chrysostom missed about what a bishop can do, that is somehow being claimed that is representative. But I can't see anything else that is there, because the presbyter is otherwise fully equal when it comes to serving the liturgy, doing all the sacraments, the masses, all the rest. The presbyter does everything other than ordination, as long as he does it with the consent of the local bishop.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems as though the criterial evidence for Vatican I has been funneled down to a normative episcopal action in foreign territories, not by invitation, not by permit, but by its own enforcement.
Yeah, by right. So he has the right to do that, and no one can argue. Right, and if I do argue, the bishop gets deposed for daring to interfere with the right of the Pope for doing so, sort of thing.
Right. So then, one of my questions would be, and this was brought up in the debate, so I'd like to get your thoughts on this. The claims that come forth out of like Pope Gelasius or Pope Hormisdas, that they seem to teach that there is a sort of a perpetual protection, to the faith and the Church of Rome, in particular, the successor of Peter. so if we could try to distinguish the form of government for a second, and just those claims about how the Roman pontiff, as the successor of St. Peter, has these perpetual protections, rooted in the biblical literature. How would you understand that? Because right, Denny said this is one of the things that was confusing to me, and we're actually doing another. Ubi and I are doing a debate review on March 1st, so he'll have time to like review a lot of this stuff. And but one of the things that confused me in the debate that he brought up was, I asked him, do you accept what Leo the Great said about the papal prerogatives? And he said yes, remember? And then I said, do you believe it passes on from Peter to his successors? He said yes. And I said, successors as in the Roman popes, the Roman bishops? And he said yes. But then when we went to one of the cross exams, he said that it was mainly rhetorical, that people use these terms like always and every time and forever, but it's just rhetorical. So I was confused as to what he was saying, whether he agreed that Leo was talking concretely, symbolically. I really couldn't tell at the moment when I was in there. But how would you take in all the claims that I was bringing out? How do you take it as rhetorical? It's somewhat rhetorical, somewhat real and concrete.
Look, I think that these are the most strongest claims, and I think that actually Vatican I overshot itself. Really, its key claim is just simply stating that the See of Rome will not fall into heresy. It doesn't even have to necessarily put infallibility of the Pope, but that's sort of tied into it. And it certainly doesn't have to claim immediate episcopal jurisdiction for that. However, my sense is that these are very strong arguments. And I think that, yes, of course, because Rome stands as the center of the unity of the churches. So if Rome falls, the churches are going to start to become disunited. You're just going to start fragmenting. And so, therefore, to prevent the fragmentation of the churches, you need once the central see to be stable, so that the churches, and especially the chief see, so that the churches have a constant state of point of union, where it makes it clear where the union is to be found. And you see in the fathers talking about this, who is ever with Rome, it's Irenaeus to say, because, so I can see that is actually quite a powerful argument in this. And so I expect to see them saying this type of thing. I definitely think that the evidence is completely there that the Peter and Paul go to Rome. It becomes the first see of the Gentile church, for want of a better word, and that the bishops inherit the authority of the princely authority of Peter and Paul, really, or Peter by name, from Matthew 16, in a sense, is singled out as whenever they ordained to sit on the throne, they inherit the privileges of Peter. So yes, I see no reason why not to accept that, and that seems very well grounded, and I think the argument's quite strong of all these popes and stuff. But where I caveat this is whether there are two ways of caveat. Is one, the exclusivity of the See of Rome for the Petrine privileges and promise, and two, whether we take it in an absolute sense. So it's absolutely every bishop on the throne and never teaches any heresy, never does anything wrong, etc. Whether that we should take it absolutely. So a lot of general claims, like when we say the Nicaea, for example, all the bishops, there's a unanimous consent to the doctrine. Well, actually, about 5 bishops didn't. But nevertheless, it's correct to say unanimous, because effectively it's not a majority. It's not about more than others get there. It's not a 60%. It's not a fixed number. It's basically a unanimous, except 3 or 4 or 5 who happen to be stuck in the mud and disagreeing and refusing to come to what everybody else is saying is there. Now, occasionally, 1 or 2 voices might be, because they're holding on to the truth, might actually be the better voice, as we would argue in the case of Florence with Mark of Ephesus. But overall, the point is that unanimous doesn't mean an absolute sense of every single person says that, but it's in the sense that it's far more than a majority. It's just about overwhelmingly everyone, except with really a couple of exceptions. So that's where so when I'm talking about the history, yes, we see a constant line of good saintly bishops in Rome, and they kept the faith very well there. Well, you could say was Pope here taught something a bit odd here, and that one taught a little bit odd there, and this one made a mistake here. Okay, but that is sort of detail. It doesn't get the overall theme, and it allows this non-absoluteness. That Honorius messed up, and he's the okay, fine. It's one gets posed as a heresy. Not all of them are saints, sort of thing. That's okay, because what matters is the overall consistency and preservation of a doctrine. So, yeah. Now, the other caveat on that was, for me, the danger of Rome is where it claims to get to a point of infallibility, and it claims an exclusivity of a patroncy, denying it to also Alexandria, Antioch, and the same privileges to Constantinople. So when it claims that to an exclusive sense, it excludes the other sees, then this is a state of sort of separation, a state of pride, which is the danger that the apostolic can fall into. And one of the very clever things it used to do, of course, to preserve itself, was they didn't preach on Sundays, unlike the standard practice of preaching. And B, they didn't read the creed in the Mass on Sundays. Both things actually mean you're never going to confess the wrong faith, and you're never going to teach a heresy during the liturgy. So you actually, by custom, don't do anything which could allow heresy to be taught bareheaded ex cathedra during the Mass, or the creed to be read wrong or something, and someone confessed the faith. And it's not until they actually brought the creed into the liturgy in the 11th century, when they brought in the filioque, that there came a problem in the East, where now you are confessing something which we don't recognize, which we can say that's not right, it's heretical. Whereas before, Rome was safe from that. So it changed its own practice and ended up putting itself in a dangerous position. So this is one reason why East and West, even though the filioque is quite common, he taught among the West, and then the Pope didn't jump down on it, but because it wasn't formally done in the Mass in Rome, or okay, we can sort of leave it over. Rome was reserving along. And this is what I like to say. I'm just going into this. Even with Orthodox churches, what matters for me when we talk about the faith is not what one bishop says or a synod agrees in some idea. It's what faith is necessarily to be confessed by a bishop when he is ordained as a bishop. So we have the confession of faith. He has to confess these ecumenical councils. He's going to obey the canons and all this. So this is a confession. This is what matters. As soon as there's a heresy introduced in that, then the synod becomes heretical. But if there's no such heresy, it doesn't matter if 1 or 2 of their bishops say something, they make a policy decision which is heretical. The synod is still in the faith. It's still in the church. But as soon as they say something that's contradictory to the faith, add something in there, do some change, or in their liturgy start confessing the different creed, that's when you've got a problem. But until then, you can overlook many, many ills. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what you can see in Rome, a nice stability. So Rome made a mistake, I think. It became solo. We are there. It introduced a creed, which was a changed creed, which was forbidden. We can go arguments, but it was a changed creed. And literally, technically, they were confessing a different faith to the East. Whether you agree it's a right faith or it's the same faith in technical reason, but the actual literal words said were a different declaration of faith than the ones in the East. And then this whole thing of Gregory saying you can ordain this universal Episcopal thing, which and when they claim this, so the universal Episcopal rite, confessing the wrong creed, and excluding Antioch and Alexandria as Petrine sees, and Rome as having the same privileges, which can only be Petrine privileges. That are the privileges of Rome are Petrine privileges, which Constantinople has. When they cut them off, then I think there's an argument of pride gets in the way. So they have this thing, but they by excluding in a prideful thing and claiming more than they really could have. And another thing is when they started ordaining emperors or deciding that they could interfere in the political emperors and make that choice. That was a huge clash between the separation of church and state. When they did that, they brought themselves into a position where they had no right to vis-a-vis the state with Charlemagne, and that was actually broke the Commonwealth, that broke the synergy of state and empire and church by when they did that, and that was really almost the beginning of the real separation when they did that. So these claims, which gave it more power than it was, I think it could be its downfall. So what I'm arguing is that there's a way that because they persist in something which is denying the tradition over and over again, they could lose their position because they are denying their own position, because they're denying it in the other sees. And you see this with Gregory the Great. There's no universal bishop. There's no universal bishop who has a universal episcopal rights. That's what he means. And there's no, there's the patron sees 1 and 3, Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. So as soon as you cut those over, you're actually denying his teaching, the tradition of the church, which you see in the apostolic, Nicene canons basically support that. So it's when Rome sort of becomes arrogant, it becomes single-minded, it becomes exclusive to these particular rites and denies them to others. I think this is the danger it could fall into. And when it did that, the East had no choice but to say, well, you're going to take it all to yourself and deny us. You've cut yourself off. So I think this is a risk. And the Eastern perspective, of course, is that the patron rites continue in Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch. And so they are preserved. And you see the orthodoxy of these three sees until the last century or so has been very, very stable. Again, with the minor things, the odd patriarch here says something stupid and wrong, and the odd one is a heretic. But you see a stability as far as the Orthodox faith is concerned in the East that was as good for the second millennium as any consistency in Rome in the first millennium. I
have a question about that because my original question was, how do you interpret those claims of Petrine protection? You seem to take the position that, which even Catholics don't absolutize it, right? Because there's still a debate about that. I have to admit, there are some Catholics today who do think that you can't even have a pope who is a heretic himself, let alone teaching ex cathedra, heresy. But I would not take the position that the Bishop of Rome is protected absolutely, But you seem to take these claims as they were stated. And so my question to follow up from that, because just for the listeners, if you weren't following or if you're just coming in, Father Patrick was given like some of the alternatives that Ubi Petrus said in the debate, which is like, well, this is typical of Roman rhetoric. It's it's not meant to be read literally. So when they said that Christ established something in Peter, and then the prerogatives and protections to Peter passing on to the church in Rome and the patriarchs, that's kind of more or less legendary, or it doesn't correspond to practical reality was usually what somebody means when they say it was purely rhetorical. But Father Patrick And I think Father Patrick follows some of the Byzantine medievals, because if you read Simeon of Thessaloniki, I don't know if you've gotten this book yet, Father.
Yes. Yeah.
And some of the medievals I call them medievals, but some of the Byzantine authors from like the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, none of them seem to take the view that this whole patronology of Rome was mythological, legendary, or they seem to, that those things are true. So my question is, if we are to compare those Petrine protection promises in Scripture to like a seed, right? It grew in the first millennium in some way, right? The Bishop of Rome often. How did that plant continue after the schism?
Okay, so
I don't know if my question's making sense or not.
So, in a sense, yes. So, what we have is Pope Leo, Gelasius, and stuff speak about, and obviously they are speaking about in terms of their own see as a see of Rome, and which is perfectly natural, and they are the chief see, and there is a sense of a priority to Rome, to Alexandria and Antioch, and I think that's clear. There's a certain place that Rome has as Rome, that Alexandria and Antioch, even though they are Petrine sees. So there's a distinction here between the Petrine see in Rome and the Petrine see in Alexandria and Antioch. So what I would say is there's a clear case of this, and it's clearly talking about Rome in that context. So where I'm saying, okay, what's happened is I see in Rome, I'm not seeing the consistency of the whole tradition being maintained in Rome. I think that the Eastern churches have much better being faithful in an unchanging way in faith and in practice, which is one of the most important things, to the Nicaea, for example. So, for example, in Orthodox churches, there are abuses, but in principle, we don't kneel on Sundays still. Whereas in Roman Catholic, you go to Tridentine Mass, everyone's
on their knees
to do this. And I'm going, well, how is that consistent with Nicaea and Leo the Great, who's absolutely adamant that you cannot change any of the canons of Nicaea? It is utterly forbidden to do so. These were spread for the Holy Spirit. So that is a common normative practice in the West, to suddenly do something contrary to what is the canon of Nicaea. Is like, okay, no, something's not adding up right here. And then you can see the common practice of Wednesday and Friday fasts. Well, what's happened in the East? Why are they not doing Wednesday and Friday in the West anymore? This is apostolic practice. It was everywhere done this. Now it's suddenly stopped, and it's just Friday, and all of that's almost forgotten. So I'm not seeing the traditions as the apostles passed them on being carried, but I am seeing them still being continued in the Orthodox Church, at least in principle, and at least no one has made any official statements otherwise. So none of the bishops and the synods are saying, no, you cannot, you must kneel on this. Now, there might be a piety, like in Romania, where all people kneel, and you go, no. But nevertheless, that is, and the Russians will kneel down during the epiclesis or whatever. Now, that maybe no one's abusing it, but there's no rule saying you have to do that. They haven't changed the rule. It just, you can say there's not everyone's following it. Okay, that's a different matter. So, so these things. So when I'm saying, okay, I'm seeing the traditions in the more literal sense, and I think most scholars or historians, everyone would agree. I don't think there's anyone that say Orthodox Church is fossilized to some degree. So, therefore, if the Roman promise is correct to simply Rome, I'm having to sort of rethink what is tradition here. And it seems to me to be collapsing rather rapidly into simply whatever the Pope decides. Now, I know there's lots of arguments that is not the case, but I'm the logic of way it's moving, and especially with Pope Francis, it's getting very hard to talk about the position of the papacy and obedience to the papacy, etc., without having to basically go down that path, because you very quickly end up in SPX and all these other sort of semi-schismatic groups or fighting against the papacy, and he can just defrock anyone he doesn't like. So I'm struggling in practice to see how, even though you're trying to defend against it, that doesn't simply devolve into whatever the Pope says. Whereas in the East, well, no, it's what is passed in the canons if someone's not teaching it. So what I'm saying, and why I'm saying all that, is I'm saying, okay, this tradition, this unfailing tradition, seems to be a privilege, which is also true of Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome, and Constantinople. Sorry, so Constantinople has basically kept the same traditions in the first millennium, and you might criticize it for being keeping it too narrowly, at least until the last century, sort of thing, and it's been pretty stable. It hasn't gone off into some sort of weird heresy, and even Roman Catholics would accept there's nothing sort of heretical about Constantinople. It might be schismatic, but there's nothing heretical. Okay, they don't accept the filioque, but apart from that, they haven't gone off into weird. Nor is Alexandria, nor is Antioch, for that matter. They've remained stable as far as the Orthodox faith of the first millennium is concerned. Well, there's a promise. The Petrine promise has been continued in these three sees just as it was given. It's only that Rome decided to go off into a sort of a self-glorified route of excluding itself from the others. It's been the sole Petrine see, the sole one. And I think, therefore, in its pride, it's sort of the one danger it could fall. It has excluded itself because, and in practice, the traditions haven't been kept. It's evolving rapidly, and even things like the death penalty. No, yes, no. Suddenly we'll bless gay marriages. All these little things are sort of compounding. None of them in itself matters, but it's a sort of over centuries. It's a little compounding going. I'm not seeing that stability of the apostolic tradition, which I would like to see as Vatican I claims is the whole purpose of the papacy.
Yeah. The death penalty revision is definitely the most difficult one for me, because that was issued as a command in the Old Testament. I'm like, right now, my family, we're going through Deuteronomy in the evenings, and thank God my kids are not hearing what is coming out of the Vatican, because, otherwise I'd have to be constantly trying to explain, why is there this? Why is God saying this here? And Pope Francis saying that this is a big no-no, So, I mean, I always keep myself open, because if I am wrong, I mean, I pray all the time, God, protect me and lead me away from error, But if I don't have any more antennas, to accept when I'm wrong, I won't ever have the chance to be corrected, So it's definitely a challenge for me. Very tense issue, like what you're talking about, the way that Rome was in the first millennium as opposed to the way that Rome is today. I mean, that was one of the parts of the debate that I thought was the strongest, was when Ubi said, how's that working out for you today? Right? Because anybody who reads my posts knows that I'm not happy with what's going on, So that was a particularly strong point, and so I can't take that away from the Orthodox when we're observing these issues. I really don't, it's sort of a moment of paralysis, really. I'm not saying that, oh, I'm wrong, I need to change right now. But I'm also not saying, oh, this is a nothing burger. We know how to talk. We know how to overcome that with this, that, and the third refutation. I just don't know. I don't know what to say about that, But to summarize your statement is basically the Petrine promises that were included into, papal decrees and some of the claims of the fathers. that is it's more expansive than Catholics interpret it, because they're always thinking about just Rome, just the successors of Peter.
So I just interrupted a little bit. Just Rome as in old Rome,
old Rome,
not Rome as in new Rome,
old
and
Rome.
The success of Peter's, not counting the success of Peter's in Alexandria and the successes of Peter's in Antioch. And they were both successors of Peter's. Both lines are successors of Peter's, in both of those sees. They are Petrine sees. They are successors of Peter equally as Rome is. Gregory the Great makes this clear. So yeah, this is this whole point I'm talking about, this blindsidedness of exclusivity to Rome, and it just calling it all into Rome, just sinking totally in this little bubble of Rome and forgetting the same promise must be applied to Alexandria and Antioch, as Gregory says, Petrine sees. Each bishop is a successor of Peter there. And you would have to, if you deny them the stability, then you're denying that they are Petrine sees. So the question is what ground did the Rome fall? That it shouldn't have. It should be stable. And that my argument is because it chose something exclusive and because it changed its own practice, that it could do it. It's a pride. It's the fall of the devil, really. It's this, we are and then overreaching a little bit beyond itself. And I think Constantinople at the moment is actually in danger of doing exactly the same thing. It's not that we Orthodox Church haven't got problems of this in itself, and we are not thinking about problems. I think we need a lot more Petrine primacy, but we also need it in the proper balance. I think Constantinople is doing too much, like going Vatican I's sense, and that's causing huge problems in the unity of our churches by overreaching itself. But I think there's a counter argument in the Orthodox Church at the moment, which is trying to undermine that. And then you've got the problem like Ubi's bringing up, this Apostolic Canon 34, where it's a synodal thing, and then they're applying that absolutely in all situations. Therefore, the first see must have a synodal over all, call all bishops, and the Constantinople's claiming this sort of whoa. No, that's not first millennium. That's a synodal idea, which is a modern idea in Orthodox thinking, which has now been claimed to be the Orthodox practice. No, that's you've got to be very careful about what we're saying there. And then this whole thing of Ravenna, whatever, you sort of got the universal see, the next level, and the Episcopate, for example. Well, no. The three layers are the Episcopate, yes, the metropolitans, who are many synods, hundreds of synods across the world, and the U.S. Assembly Conference, or whatever you'd call it in Roman Catholic terms. That should be a proper metropolitan who ordain all their own bishops and basically run themselves. And just the only reason you go to Rome is to appeal a decision. Then Rome has no interference with you at all. That's how it used to be. You even see all the different ecclesiastical practices in the West.
In the West,
schism, each country was doing its own thing. They only used Rome as a court of appeal. It didn't oppose itself. Everyone looked at it, just in Constantinople. Everyone's following Constantinople in the East, just like they did in Rome in the West. Everyone doing the right. Even Alexandria and Antioch and Jerusalem all copied Constantinople by the 11th, 12th century. It didn't impose anything. They willingly chose to follow it. I mean, that's what you get in the West as well. It became, but it wasn't imposed. It was just simply everybody thought, oh, this is the standard, so let's follow it. So, anyway, I'm losing my track of it. But yes, it's exclusivity, and I think that is where Rome made a mistake, and the Petrine seed carries on in the promise carries on, and it hasn't broken. And Constantinople, of course, receives, because it is Rome. It receives, as we've spoken about before, the same privileges, actually the privileges of Peter. Therefore, also the stability of Peter applies to Constantinople.
Yeah.
But not actually. One bishop every now and again will go into heresy. There'll be problems and things, but the church structure from generation to generation will remain stable, even despite the old bishops going funny.
Okay. We got some questions from the viewers. I'm just going through here to see. Let me see here. I was appointed by Russian Church. Okay. Father, is it being a successor of Peter as much as it is a successor of the Bishop of Rome. I asked him if he could rephrase that, and he gave an elaboration here. I guess what I'm saying is that is the protection of Peter not just being a successor of him, but being a successor of the Bishop of Rome. Many bishops can trace their lineage to Peter, I believe. So I think what he's asking is, what about like the clergy in Corinth that might have been ordained by Peter? Are they successors of Peter in the same way that Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch are?
Right. At one level, you can talk about them. Well, no, I think you have to be careful here. The claim is that Peter sort of ruled in Antioch for a while, for 7 years or something, then he left. So he has to sort of have not only just an ordaining someone and passing through, he has to have a sort of residing there, or in the case of Alexandria, his disciple is sent there precisely as his disciple. So in other words, someone he is appointed in his place to represent him into Alexandria. Then there's the issue that the three, St. Gregory the Great says that there's one Petrine see in three bishops sitting on the same one see. And that is Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. You see this in the Council of Canons of First Nicaea, where it talks about the scope of the jurisdiction of Alexandria and Antioch being based on that of Rome. In other words, tying them in as the Petrine thing. And there's another canon which speaks of Jerusalem, because its privileges is not the same Petrine privileges. But interestingly, in the canon, we're talking about the privilege of Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome, is a protection of the metropolitan synods, that these rights of these synods has to be remained, and the seniority preserved in this. So these two things, I think, are fundamental to the church, is the Petrine see in three and the metropolitan sees everywhere else. Now, exarchs can come and go a little bit, though there's a certain stability of it. But these these things that the bishop, the metropolitan synods, which running the day-to-day councils, they do it twice a year, basically. They meet twice a year to deal with all the common matters of the region. And then you've got the principal appeal courts. So I think Petrine see here is very specifically applying to three sees, and Constantinople, because it effectively gets grafted into its Rome, and it effectively picks up whatever was given to Rome, it gets given itself. So now, as far as I can see, it is a Petrine promise, which somebody like St. Leo the Great is to which he's referring, and Gelasius, etc. Gelasius is referring, and not simply to Rome. They're seeing the Petrine promise in the See of Rome, and the bishops of the See of Rome maintaining the Petrine promise. But I'm not seeing them claim that the stability belongs to Rome itself, as distinct from its Petrine inheritance. I would argue that there is a sense of jurisdictional scope which Rome has, which Alexandria and Antioch don't have, a more universal scope, which Constantinople basically has as well. And you see this in the canons. You see this in the canon Council of Constantinople 879 and 880, where the first canon says, whoever the Pope of Rome excommunicates must be accepted, and Constantinople is excommunicate. Whoever he deposes is deposed. But also, the Pope of Rome must also accept anyone that the Ecumenical Patriarchal Constantinople deposes or is deposed, etc. So, in other words, there's a quality that Rome can't overturn a deposition of Constantinople or excommunication. But it still adds at the end that Rome has a certain level of privilege. It's not undermining that, but it's showing that it doesn't actually have a right to overturn the excommunication decisions of Constantinople. And this was agreed by Pope John at the time, and actually for centuries afterwards. So that's just interesting thing. But that's not talking about Alexandria and Antioch. Don't seem to be involved in that. So in that sense, there is something about Rome as Rome, which has a certain priority. But I think the general promises are Peter, and therefore they apply also to Alexandria and Antioch.
he says, what does Father Patrick, this is Palermo Trapani, what does Father Patrick say about Constantinople in 381 changing the original Nicene Creed from 325 AD unilaterally?
Right. They didn't change it. There's two creeds. They made their own confession of faith at the council, which parallels that of Nicaea, but is not the Nicene Creed. It's a creed of Constantinople, which keeps the faith of Nicaea, but it's a creed that also explains about the Holy Spirit. So there's other issues about the Holy Spirit came after Nicaea, and they needed to address these new heresies about the Holy Spirit. So they wrote it and explained about the Holy Spirit, not changing the faith, but expanding on that. But it's a creed of that council. A creed belongs to the council. That decision, it's the Holy Spirit. It's perfect. The Creed of Nicaea is perfect against Arianisms. That was the issue of the council. The Constantinople is perfect in its attack against the Arian, the things about against the Holy Spirit, but it also confesses in its own words the parallel to that, but it doesn't do exactly the same as Nicaea. And we see this at Chalcedon, because both creeds are read as distinct creeds, as of distinct councils. And again, you see this is the second thing, Ecumenical, they do it the same. By the seventh, what's happened is that the Creed of Constantinople becomes by default the universal creed for baptism, for the liturgies. You see in Ireland, they're using the Creed of Constantinople for their liturgy. You'll see it in the baptismal creeds in the West. They're using the Creed of Constantinople as the default creed. For that. It is not actually until the Franks start going, oh, well, these are different, and they sort of try to merge them together, and you start seeing in the Creed of Constantinople, they add in bits of God, which is and then it's a true God in the Nicaea. And they just have true God in Constantinople. And then the Franks start interpolating this into Constantinople because they think it's a change of Nicaea. No, it's not. It's two distinct creeds. Just that we talk about the Nicene faith, and in practice we call it the Nicene Creed, but in fact it's a distinct creed. So it's never changed. It was not a unilateral change. It was their own confession of faith to deal with the issues and the questions at the time of their council. Just that the church decided never to do a creedal thing again. They just simply made other types of decisions later on.
Thank you. Yeah, you often see them talk about the creed of the 318 fathers, and then they'll say the faith of the 150 fathers, which is two different creeds. Black Elk says, Father, what is the strongest argument against your position and why it fails in your opinion? Same to Erick.
Oh, he's always difficult. The argument, I think, where it does get tricky, and I think this Erick is probably, and I've said this, I think when we had a debate earlier, where we've got the promises of Leo and Gelasius, and you see this history. I do think this is a strong case for the stability of Rome. I think this is a strong case. I'm to maintain that, I'm having to sort of move away from an absolutist position and saying it continues in Rome, Constantinople. So it sort of shifts it away from being the apostolic see as the Roman see, which is the implication of these things. So I'm having to say that implication isn't absolute in there. So you could challenge me with perhaps that we need to absolutize it. There's an argument for that. And my counter, obviously, as I said today, is, well, where's the apostolic tradition being preserved most accurately, and are these other sees stable? Yes, okay. Therefore, the promise is actually, in fact, being carried out. Therefore, that supports that I'm right to be able to tweak that particular point, because otherwise, I am actually saying that this is actually correct, and I agree with it, and it is being maintained as promised.
Yeah, he asks me as well, and it's interesting because my answer is sort of inverse to yours, in that I think that the contemporary situation in Rome today is what makes the argument of the Orthodox very strong, I'm not saying that there's nothing in the history to support them. Obviously there is, but I want to say the strongest one, the one that like the Mike Tyson left hook for me, is the contemporary situation in Rome. And so folks have always asked me throughout the years, Eric, you say that in the debate on primacy that Rome wins by like a hair, an eyebrow lash. Why do you say that? And I mostly say that, or at least I mostly said that, um, in the sense that the papacy creates its own tensions. So it's kind of like if if you got two people running in a race and one of them didn't tie their shoes very well at the beginning, and then all of a sudden they've got a lace flying around, and then they trip, and then they have to get up and catch up. The papacy, with its claims about infallibility, indefectibility, and all these things, universal jurisdiction, episcopal jurisdiction over everyone, what happens is you would expect there to be a 1-to-1 proportion from the claims to what is done practically. But what we see is it's not balanced. There's not an equal weight on the balance. Like if you're looking at one of those ancient balances on a triangle, if you put the papal claims on one plate and then you put practical reality on the other side, they should be equal, right? But what you see is Pope Honorius happening. Then we see Pope Vigilius happening. Then we see the situation with the Great Western Schism, where you have two popes, and then a third one comes later, and it's like, what do we do? I mean, all the canonists are, you have the University of Paris trying to figure out if is there some sort of an emergency fire extinguisher in a situation like this, and they couldn't come to an agreement, and finally they came to the view that there is some sense in which a council can sort of come in like a sniper out in the trees and sort of bring things back into order. And so that creates a tension, right? Because you're expecting the papacy to be this self-replenishing engine that's always got everything it's supposed to promise, or everything that it's promised to be, And so the papacy creates its own tensions. That's what I mean by saying that. So today, when we're looking at Rome, Vatican II, we've got the situation with Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis. All of these popes have been at the very edge of the circle of orthodoxy, if they haven't gone over. And like I've already expressed on the issue of the death penalty, among some other things, I don't even know how to say they've kept their feet in the line. I would not be able to go into a debate like that. Like if Father Patrick or Ubi Petrus wanted to do a debate on whether the Catholic Church has maintained the same faith on the morality and ethics of the death penalty, I would say no, absolutely not, because I'm going to lose, So that's the strongest argument why the Catholic position is wrong. Why do I think it fails? Well, that's why I say it's an inverse to Father Patrick's answers, because when I go into the sources of the first millennium, I tend to see there being a very narrow meaning to some of these things. And so, and I don't see Eastern Orthodoxy being the logical and the most apparent fruition of those things. That doesn't mean I don't accept any challenges to go back and review what I'm seeing. I certainly do. I certainly am. I mean, look, just here's the proof. I just purchased this book from patristic nectar. So I'm trying, but that's the reason why I would say that it fails. So let's see what somebody else is going to say here. And Disney, okay. Erick Ybarra. This is the EDZ25. The Russian Church nominating bishops against the third canon of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which can only be abrogated by another ecumenical council. How do they get around that? You know, I don't, Father, if you remember, I'm going to look it up. I don't remember the third canon of that
No,
council.
I don't remember it off the top of my head.
I'm going to see if I can pull it up.
This is my canon book.
Yeah, and here's what's worse is I don't know if the New Advent portion has the oh yeah, it does. Okay, so the third canon. I'll share my screen because this is not fair to not have it for both.
Oh yes, the civil rulers ordaining them.
Yeah, let me see if I can present, share screen. Okay, let me get rid of his question here and let me zoom in if I can here. Okay, yeah, oh boy, this is really small. Let's see if I can.
That's all right, I can see it fine. Maybe everybody else can.
Okay, I'll go back to Canon 8 or Canon 3. Okay, let every election of a bishop, presbyter, or deacon made by princes stand null, according to the canon, which says, if any bishop make use of the secular powers, shall be their means obtain jurisdiction over any church, he shall be deposed and also excommunicated. And okay, so the idea here is that kings and princes can't ordain, or they can't elect. It can elect, right, a bishop, presbyter, or deacon. And he said that Rome or that
how's Russia getting around this canon? Basically, how the church in Russia getting around this canon, assuming that the Russian state is appointing the bishops. Okay,
yeah, I'm not aware of any facts to that question. So, Father, if you know of anything, I don't.
Yeah, well, this is actually probably one of the things that I think where Rome possibly has a stronger case than Orthodoxy, not in principle, but more in practice in this case. Unfortunately, the position of the Petrine Sees, Constantinople and stuff, has been abused in two directions in somewhere in the East. I view getting an overexertion of Constantinople's power by Constantinople, which was even putting the papacy to shame in the first millennium. Or you're getting a reaction against that is to deny any sort of authority. Now, the reason that's a problem denying any authority is as soon as you do that, then the canons themselves are only as good as someone actually making a determination on that canon and other churches all recognizing that determination on that canon, that ruling on the canon. And so if the Russian church doesn't do anything about it, then nothing will be done, and they'll just carry on. That doesn't mean there's not consequences for this. There certainly are consequences, and there's a good argument that Peter the Great basically makes Russian church's Department of State, and that's why you end up with the communist revolution, because it was becoming utterly corrupted by the state power. But unfortunately, unless you've got ability to appeal to something like Constantinople or Rome to say, hey, what's going on? Or they have ability to stand across and say, look, this church is going wrong. And like Leo writing letters, and now it's interesting. Rome doesn't just sometimes excommunicates them if it needs to, but it's mostly the Pope acts by writing letters, exhortations,
telling them to do something.
Sort yourself out. This is not right. Sort it out. Not saying I will sort it out, but you sort it out. And I think this is absolutely important. This function that is one who's doing that, but that function is entirely dependent on the same canon law. And so this is why I like the alternative appeals. You can appeal to your exile or because you have to be using the same canon law in this case. and then you can appeal one or the other, and their decision is binding. And the other one can't overturn it. This means this works to preserve the same canon law, because if you're both teaching different things, you can't do that. Because if your exarch is going, okay, we're going to interpret it this way or ignore this, well, you just appeal to Constantinople, and Constantinople go, no. And that decision is binding. So this is an important part. But unfortunately, the canons themselves, unless you've got authorities recognize that can actually bind somebody on the disobedience of that and pass a decision on the canon, they unfortunately don't act of themselves. All that happens is that God will act eventually for the disobedience and bring a certain punishment and consequence to that. Oh, and by the way, just something on my head while I'm at it. I do think that despite what I would think about the teachings that are going on in Rome, old Rome now, God does seem to have preserved a bishop there until now. He hasn't destroyed the see, buried it underground,
Right.
wiped the city out or whatever. I mean, they've gone into all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And I agree with Eric. The biggest problem when you go to papacy and you're saying this is infallible, this is it. As soon as you start getting two bishops at the same, popes claiming to be, you have a big problem. The Eastern position on this has much more flex. It can cope with a lot more flexness. But as soon as you start getting these absolutized positions and narrow positions, as Eric says, you end up with a lot of problems. And if the practice doesn't match the theory, then it gets increasingly difficult. And you see why you get all these other groups and heartbreak, what's going on in the thing. But anyway, that's I thought so the problem with the canons is that unless someone is actually enforcing them and has a certain authority to enforce them, nothing is done until God basically brings the consequences upon them from that church.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're at an hour and a half, Father. I'm getting
right. I gotta get
I got to get going. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts, having this discussion. Audience, if you could please like the video. That has a very technical benefit to me and my channel. And if you liked what you listened to, or if you have any further questions, please make use of the comments. I'm sure Father Patrick and I will kind of periodically look and see if there's anything left there.
Yeah.
All right, Father, do you want to have anything where if somebody wants to find you, see some of the literature? I know 2 of your books. I've already linked them in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, those are my two books at the moment. So I'm just hoping that they get a bit more traction. My PhD is now being translated into Romanian, and it's been sold throughout Romania, which is quite cool.
That's awesome.
But otherwise, it's not well discussed by many people. So anyone wants to read it and discuss it, I'll be happy. I'm interested in the ideas and a real critique of the ideas, which is a good chunk of what I've expressed tonight. And also, if anyone is curious, I can do a plug for my parish website. I think, Eric, if I can put my parish website, we got a YouTube channel now. My parishioners want to
really?
do a YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to see my sermons or stuff like that,
please.
I think I'm allowed to promote that.
Please. If you send me the link, I'll put it in the show notes. Everybody listening, just to take a look at the show notes. 2 of his books on the minor orders in Orthodoxy, his book on deifying relations, which goes into ecclesiology, and then obviously the church website. You can see him further there. All right, everybody. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. You still there?